Hi, it's me, Roosevelt. So, I have a bit of a tinfoil hat theory. I think time in Teyvat is a little weird. Like, we have all these chaotic time spaces, a mysterious goddess of time and moments, all topped off with confusing memory alterations and a not-so-clear timeline. And now there's reignited interest in samsaras, and potentially time loops, with a note outside of the Narcissenkreuz Tower. Fortunately, with patch 4.4 in Shenyu Vale, we have received new time lore. And that's found in a little Fontaine bookshop with the book series Time Trekker. No, please don't go. Please hear me out. Listen, it's like my brand. I love books and I love reading. I'm Roosevelt, I'm 19, and I never learned how to read. So Time Trekker is a story that involves, time travel. Basically, the main character travels to different periods to solve riddles, only to find out that he set up the riddles for himself from the future. So it has a very specific kind of time travel, but one that brings up a question about time. How changeable is the past? Or, for that matter, a future that has already been prophesied? After I've summarized the book, I'm going to make the argument that the book has an obvious message about fate, but has a more hidden meaning about free will. So, let's trek on to the story then. The series starts out with an unnamed narrator observing some high-class society meeting set in modern-ish Fontaine. They're discussing high society things, including academics and philosophy that you don't understand, and how bored they are. One lady, Aviva Nenonen, is opining about how all of the world has already been conquered, so there's nothing left for man to explore. But then, one member of the group, Nevin Sirik, pipes up. He says that she is neglecting the one area we haven't conquered, time itself, and Sirik makes the argument that you cannot separate time and space, so therefore, time itself is a space that can be conquered. After this discussion, Sirik announces that he will have a time machine made and ready in 2 months. Fast forward, and there's another meeting for Sirik to show off his time machine, and Sirik looks older than he should. Sirik simply presents a tiny, exquisitely crafted model of a whale airship. He is questioned and almost ridiculed about it, but Sirik proclaims this is just a projection of his time machine, and in these 2 months, Sirik used the machine. The narrator then relays his story. Sirik went back in time to the Remurian Empire, where he witnessed the massive scale of the architecture and Remus's golems. Sirik encounters a native, Idea Anavana, who for some reason believes his extraordinary situation. After some questioning, Idea reveals to him a stone slate with a riddle. This riddle is not written in Remurian, but modern script. Sirik eventually finds that the answer to this riddle is a date in the future he must input into his time machine. He bids farewell to his Remurian friend and departs. In this new time, he finds another riddle revealing another date. This continues in other time periods with increasing complexity. He eventually gets to the point where the riddle gives him an answer of 0, moment 0. There, he witnesses a primal sea and red skies dotted with blurry stars. He's shocked to see the Palais Marmonia beneath the waves. And he also finds a person waiting for him, someone who looks just like him. They have a chat where Sirik asks this reflection, "You created these riddles?" Almost as if reflecting his words, this other Sirik responds, "You created these riddles." So our Sirik asks if 0 is the answer to the big riddle of time. To summarize what other Sirik says, 0 is not an answer, but another mystery. The answer to time's riddle is likened to a mirror. When 2 mirrors face each other, time is the infinite reflection of light therein. As you look at the gap between the 2 mirrors, all beams of light fall along the same plane. Everything must infinitely recur, for this is the nature of a mirror. There is no past or future, for the past is the future. The Palais Marmonia was always sunk before it was built, and that's why you cannot conquer time. In fear, Sirik pulls out a gun and shoots this doppelganger and thus concludes his tale. The room is left dumbstruck. Sirik says that we can choose to believe him or not, but as he leaves, he says, "My future self awaits a riddle that I must set for him." So the book ends on a rather dark, mind-bending note. But before we get into any big brain topics on actual time travel, I wanted to point out some fun references. At the start, Lady Nenonen quotes a king named Argiade. This seems to be a reference to the Argead dynasty of ancient Greece, which included Alexander the Great. What she says seems to be referencing this one quote about Alexander weeping because he had nothing else to conquer. But that's not a real historical quote. That's something Hans Gruber said in the original 1988 Die Hard movie. Although I guess if you're a bunch of pretentious bourgeoisie, it'd be pretty in character to confuse a Bruce Willis movie with Plutarch. Hilarious. So, another cool reference. Nearly all the names in the book are palindromes, like Hexenzirkel, meaning they read the same backwards and forwards. Interestingly, the stone slate riddles Cyric solves are also palindromic and arranged in a square. This makes me think this is referring to the Sator square, which is a widespread cryptogram that's thousands of years old, whose meaning is still a mystery. The text of the Sator square actually appears in-game in the Beastly Rifts. But the square's palindromic nature also inspired another piece of time travel media, the movie Tenet. Boy, if I had a penny every time Hoyoverse did something that made me think of a Christopher Nolan movie, I'd have a little bit of sense. The biggest reference, though, comes towards the end of the story when other Cyric monologues about the nature of time. It explicitly draws from The Garden of Forking Paths, which is a mid-20th century short story by Jorge Luis Borges that explores free will and the infinite possibilities of the future. But Time Trekker outwardly rejects its philosophical underpinnings by asserting that there is no past nor future. And as such, free will is as much an illusion as time is. Any and every tragic destiny cannot be avoided, and we are all ultimately prisoners of fate. Wow, okay, that existential crisis really snuck up on us. This last part was just to give a preview that Time Trekker may actually have a very layered meaning. Yes, it is about time travel, but here's the thing. Although the machinations of time are the foundation, the real significance lies within the implications for fate and destiny. Also, a quick speculation disclaimer, and also a heads up for the podcast-style listeners. The next sections are going to have a few visuals that might be helpful for illustrating some concepts. Time Trekker has what you would call a self-consistent timeline. Now, most of the traveling Cyric does is bounce around different periods to solve riddles. But at the end of the book, Cyric says that he must leave to go set up the riddles, because it's implied that Cyric set them up for himself. All of his time travel was already integrated into the past. In this type of timeline, you can't change anything, because everything, including the time travel itself, has already happened. The past is fixed. I do think this is similar to what happened during a second story quest, where we witness a planting the sacred sakura 500 years ago. Miko said it was always there to her, and it was certainly there when we arrived in Inazuma. I digress, but I think this goes even deeper. Towards the end, Other Cyric says that there is no past or future. His subsequent description of time seems to invoke the block universe. In our perception of time, the past is behind us, the future is unknown, and the present is now. But according to the block universe, the past, present, and future exist simultaneously. There is technically no past or future because the present is arbitrary according to the theory of relativity. This is perhaps why Cyric refers to his past self as his future self, because past and future is a matter of perspective. Since the past and future are just as real as the present, the block model implies that not only is the past fixed, but also the future. Spacetime is an unchanging block, like a movie reel. We just only perceive the cross-section we call now, a singular frame in the movie. This is why Other Cyric says that the past is the future, and is what Other Cyric means when he said that the Palais Mermonia sank long before it was ever built. This also applies to the larger world building of Genshin with fate and destiny. For example, how Nicole called the prophecy the history of the future. And also how Dainsleif said that there are no coincidences in the world. Everything is the fruit of seeds planted long ago. This block contains all the light between the two mirrors, or you can think of it as fate. It's not a coincidence, then, the clear parallels between Time Trekker and Farina, Focalor, and the Prophecy. For example, Nevin sees a sunken Palais Marmonia, and other Cyric explains that the palace had sunk long before it was ever built, just like how Fontaine was prophesied to be flooded. And Cyric, seeing his reflection in other Cyric, and the analogy of mirrors, is very evocative of the image of Farina and Focalor in the mirror. Also, Farina's Salon Solitaire comes from another unnamed book that also features time travel. And finally, there's the stone slates, with Fontaine slates revealing a prophecy and the books holding a riddle. But the events in Fontaine suggest something interesting. The prophecy happened exactly as said, or at least the version on the stone slates did. However, the block model would also necessitate that everything that Focalor did was going to happen anyway, like that Nouvelette regaining his authority was also fated. But given Focalor's effort to deceive the heavenly principles, and the heavy emphasis on Nicole's words suggesting there are loopholes, this does not seem likely. So this is all to say, Time Trekker seems to imply a fixed timeline or a block universe where you can't change anything and have no free will. And this model may superficially work with Tevat until it doesn't. But I think in its presentation, Time Trekker is also trying to imply that things may not be as they appear. And this is where the Garden of Forking Paths comes to play. And thanks so much to my friend Saber for pointing this out and pushing me into the lore hole. The Garden of Forking Paths is a short story by Jorge Luis Borges, a renowned Latin American author of the 20th century. The story is a spy thriller with no time travel, but in its themes, it rejects the notion of a fixed timeline or block universe. Within the story, there is another frame story of an author who was attempting to write the grandest choose-your-own-adventure book of all time. This choose-your-own-adventure was intended to be a massive book where every decision infinitely forked off into new chapters. In a way, it was intended to be a continuously growing labyrinth of different choices and paths and opportunities. This ends up being the theme of Forking Paths. We have the agency and free will to make decisions that branch off into new timelines. Fate does not direct or guide your every move. As a side note, this story may have been a precursor to the many worlds interpretation of quantum mechanics, aka the multiverse. But the point here is the emphasis on free will. Here, Borges presents time as an expanding labyrinth of opportunity versus an unchanging block of fate. Time Trekker's reference to this short story is incredibly subtle. Other Cyric's monologue about time explicitly mirrors, no pun intended, an excerpt about the forking paths, and it inverts it, completely changing its meaning. In Time Trekker, 0 is not an answer but another mystery. Diverging, converging, and parallel lights form the illusion of time, where all light falls along the same plane and doesn't escape. There is no past or future, and the future is the past. Because these are arbitrary terms talking about the same thing, just seen from different perspectives. Contrast this with Forking Paths. The explanation is obvious, no mysteries here. Diverging, converging, and parallel times create a web of time that embraces every possibility. It doesn't trap and contain just one and exclude all others. Time is forever dividing itself toward innumerable futures. So I hope I've begun to make it clear how the narrative style is so similar, yet the messages are completely opposite. It's a confined block versus an unconfined labyrinth. I find this choice to be incredibly interesting. Like, why go through the effort of making a reference just to reject its message so strongly? Well, I think this may be a bit of a riddle in itself. One of the characters in Forking Paths even says of riddles, "The rules of the game, the riddle, forbid the use of the word itself. To eliminate a word completely, to refer to it by means of inept phrases and obvious paraphrases, is perhaps the best way of drawing attention to it." So, I think by mimicking and inverting the meaning of the text, Time Trekker may actually be doing just that, hiding the truth in plain sight. And perhaps the truth is that the future is more flexible than we're led on to believe. I think we've had hints of this elsewhere as well. In another book, Vera's Melancholy, which I've made a video about, one of the main characters says, "The past cannot change the future, for the predetermined rules of equilibrium are slightly more powerful than me, but the future, with its infinite possibilities, could save the world." This sentiment of the future saves the past is echoed in Dainsleif's character introduction, which has the exact same lines in the original Chinese as Vera's Melancholy, but for whatever reason, Dane's introduction was translated differently. But there's another really important theme in the Garden of Forking Paths that's a little harder to catch. It's that despite free will, this intricate web of possibilities is still limited in many ways. The main character, who is a spy, says that in this huge web made by different decisions, in most paths, he would have been caught anyway. That is, he felt destined to be hunted down as a spy. Borges refers to this as the convergence of timelines. While there is flexibility in choices, there is sometimes an inescapability of destiny. But at the same time, the implication here is that different decisions create different timelines, and thus they open up different future possibilities. And I personally think this is what both Nicole and Dainsleif refer to when they say hidden corners, or more simply, what the gods cannot see. Different choices create different opportunities, even if they arrive at the same final point. These different opportunities created by the different forking paths may be where changes can really happen. So now we've finally reached fun speculation. But think of it this way. Perhaps time and fate in Teyvat is an illusion, a hoax just as fake as the sky itself. But the reality may be that the future has way more than a single path. And fate only seems real due to these convergences of timelines. Because remember, a prophecy is only the future from the perception of the gods. Perhaps the gods see these convergences, and the path sometimes doesn't matter. Let me tie this together with an analogy. Imagine the block universe as a script for a play. As a performer, you follow the script, the same way that fate dictates your past and future. But imagine you want to change something about the story. You're not the scriptwriter or director, but you happen to know of the forking paths. So during the play, you improvise a little bit. The director may notice, but they won't care as long as you bring it back to the plot. Imagine that these changes may have seemed inconsequential, but the play is more successful, and you even had some audience interaction, and now the audience goes home with a gift. If that sounds familiar, it's because this was Kaeya's hangout. Boy, I hope this isn't foreshadowing for something crazy I'm going to say later. But there's one last topic I want to address, and it's the concept of time as a flat circle and history repeats itself. Xeric says a few other interesting things in his monologue. Everything must recur because that is the nature of a mirror. Even the imagery of light infinitely bouncing between the mirrors seems to evoke repeating patterns. Going back to Borges, he was an author interested in topics such as time, dreams, mathematics, and philosophy, and he also explored the concept of circular or repeating time. For example, in his The Doctrine of Cycles and Circular Time, or even The Immortal. But what emerges here is a discussion surrounding the eternal return. Eternal return is a concept I've talked about before, and it's foundational to the works of philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche. More specifically, there are so many references to Nietzsche and Eternal Return in the game already. Basically, Eternal Return asserts that time is infinite, but matter is finite, so history will inevitably repeat itself. Infinite time allows for infinite recombinations and possibilities, but if those combinations are limited, they repeat themselves. I should clarify now that while Block Universe and the many worlds implied by Forking Paths have more of a history in actually being used to explain the machinery of the IRL universe, Eternal Return is strictly philosophical. Nietzsche was less focused on if the basis was true and more the existential question it posed. Would you have an amour fati, or a love of fate, knowing everything will just happen again and again? This thinking is also in line with what we're given in Genshin. The IRL term samsara is a spiritual cycling, and the Sumeru Archon quest went out of its way to specify that it wasn't a time loop, but a dream playing over and over. And when the Narcissenkreuz note describes samsaras, it's very specific about referring to spiritual evolution. So while this is a clear divergence from the topic of physical time, Eternal Return still addresses the personal questions of fate versus free will. And this brings us back to Kaeya. Wait, so that was foreshadowing. In his hangout, Kaeya repeats the phrase, "Yes, so must it be," multiple times. It's in his thoughts, his words, the quest titles, and so on. I mentioned in my Kaeya Hangout video that there seemed to be some themes of Eternal Return, like in his recognition that history repeats itself. But I didn't know at the time that this is actually an explicit reference to Milan Kundera's novel, The Unbearable Lightness of Being. In Unbearable Lightness, the main character reaffirms every decision he makes by glibly attributing it to fate. With every decision, he says, "Es muss sein." This itself is a reference to Beethoven's String Quartet No. 16, where there's a call and response of "Muss es sein?" and "Es muss sein," which translates to "Must it be so?" and "So must it be." The exact same words that Kaeya repeats. This is an incredibly revealing reference because Unbearable Lightness explicitly rejects the idea of eternal return. So the book posits that instead of worrying about eternal return, or fate in general, we need to YOLO, like literally. Me and all my homies hate destiny. There's only one life to live and we gotta live it to the fullest. And here is when we can tie everything together. So, Kaeya compares fate to a script, like one written by an academia student, which implies something like a block universe. Because there is no past, present, or future in the script, it just all exists. It's all there. It is what it is. But he also says we can improvise a little bit, which to me sounds like a nod to the Forking Paths. But from a philosophical angle, Kaeya is also rejecting the very notion of fate and destiny. Kaeya also would like to defy fate. What remains to be seen, though, are those inescapable destinies, the convergence of timelines, and which of the Forking Paths Kaeya will choose. So I want to close out this video by generally going over what the implications of all these time shenanigans are for the story. In terms of the future, fate will be inescapable at some points. However, the Forking Paths give wiggle room to open new possibilities before convergence to a shared destiny. These are the hidden corners or loopholes Nicole refers to, I think. There may also be the possibility for time travel back into the past, particularly with the Travail trailer referencing Conria as chapter... I think if that does happen, then whatever happens is already baked into the timeline. Nothing changes, and we simply don't notice because it's already happened. Alternatively, there may be some wiggle room here too. The forking paths never addresses the possibility of changing the past, but the implication would be a creation of an entirely new timeline, or a new world, which, when you think about it, may be within the purview of a descender, one who can create, sustain, protect, or destroy an entire world. I won't speculate too much on that, and I'll just leave that to you guys for your own interpretation. Thank you all for watching. I also want to thank all those who helped me create this video, because time travel is a doozy, including my friends Cole, Crystal Marie, Ashikai, and many others, but in particular Saber, who helped me start all of this. Please like and subscribe, leave a comment with your own theories. I've been super busy with life, so I haven't been able to produce as much as I'd like, but thanks for sticking with me. But also, have you checked your smoke detector batteries recently? Okay, bye!